Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Erin Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. How do I love people the way they need to be loved? My conversation partner today, Erin Weber Johnson, brings us full circle to that beautiful question. Now, this is the second time Erin has joined me on this podcast. She was also my guest on episode 5, which I titled Being Connected. And we continue some of the threads that we started there with a focus on how we love people, including ourselves, not based on assumptions or some sort of self-imposed responsibility, but by doing something courageous, asking a simple question: what do you need? At the start of this conversation, I needed to tell Erin some of where I was coming from. I'd been at the hospital the night before with a family because a family member had very unexpectedly died, and that was staying with me. All of us feel things we need to think about when we connect with people in shock and grief. And Erin and I share a belief that sadness, grief, sorrow, these feelings of loss are so present in our collective lives right now. And we need spaces to talk about it. Reflecting on those feelings that are hard to feel. So even just reflecting on them gives us permission sometimes to do so. Don't worry, we laugh a lot in this conversation too, I promise. I mean, don't you find that the people you laugh the hardest with are also the ones that you can cry in front of? What is it about the connection of those feelings, my friends? I don't know. To me, gratitude always holds some grief. Because in letting ourselves see what there is to be grateful for, taking the time to honor whatever that is, be it an event or a person or a meal, we're also acknowledging that it is temporary. The event will end, the person will leave, the meal will be finished, dishes will be cleaned, and everyone will go home. Meals and holidays, food and feelings, that comes up too. I hope you find topics and ideas in this conversation that, as Erin says, kindle your imagination. And I hope the conversation prompts your own questions about what you need to ask for these days. I definitely need to say thank you. Thank you as always. It is with much gratitude that I say that, as I really appreciate your listening presence. So, let's get to this conversation. Well, good morning, Erin Weber Johnson.
Well, good morning.
It is very good to see you again and to have you back. Thank you for accepting that invitation. I've thought about and replayed and re-listened to our conversation, and I'm glad to be continuing.
Me too. In fact, I feel like it kindled imagination in me, this conversation, and I feel like these types of relationships are needed more than ever right now. And to go deep, I think it's something that I know that I am hungering for. So thank you for the invitation to go deep today.
I love that. I feel like we have a lot of intentional conversations as we're growing up, right? Like even the intensity that we engage in conversations about what we would maybe now consider silly things, like when we're in junior high and high school, and then when we are in college and we start meeting some like-minded folks and start feeling like, oh my gosh, where have these people been all my life? And we have more intentional conversations. And then maybe we meet a partner, maybe we have other relationships, and there's other types of intentional conversations. Maybe we go into therapy and that's its own sort of intentional conversation. But then you're right. Like we fade out of them, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the stuff of life, the management of life quickly takes over, right? And so how do we get through the day? And for those of us that well, we've all done it. We've all been walking through the last few years. We've had to go on survival mode, right? So there hasn't been a lot of space for intentional conversations. And yet, we've come face to face with our mortality more than once. Over and over, we have experienced, okay, who am I? What do I want to be? What is my body worth? What are other bodies worth, right? In the midst of these are really difficult, hard questions. And as we are all holding the collective, I'd call it trauma, the collective trauma together, and grieving what has been, what will not be able to be any longer, and grieving maybe the predictability of what we thought was.
Yeah.
I think this moment is ripe for these kinds of conversations, and to come back and say, whoa, what happened, Erin?
I know.
I'm in pain and I want to understand. Let's talk more. Yeah.
Yeah. And the conversation of why isn't it going away?
Yeah. And if it doesn't ever go away, what does that mean? Right. Have I done something wrong? Am I doing something wrong now? Should I be doing something? Or is this the way it is? And what do I invite into my life as I move into the world with it? Right. Those are very different conversations and different ways to look at it.
And I want to bring in some of the context of just where I am at this moment.
Yes,
because it just connects with what we started. And before I do that, I want to say with some intentionality, I am keenly aware that next week starts the holiday season, which in some ways has already started. If you walked into like a big box store a month and a half ago, you were assaulted by the holiday season. All its consumerism. Yep.
Right.
And that's fine. Look, I love me a balsam for a candle, so that's okay. I get it. But I find the holidays to be stressful on a variety of levels. And I think it's very healthy, as part of our conversation that we had last time had to do with taking care of ourselves. I think it's healthy to have some conversation about taking care of ourselves. So one of the things I can't just sweep under the rug is last night, being in the emergency room with a family of somebody who died instantaneously from a heart attack. And being in that space, and my heart is completely for them. This was, a way in which I live into what I feel called to do, which is just to bear witness, right? And to say the prayers that we need to be said, even when there was clearly such as there would be shock. At the devastating loss that nobody, the adult children, the wife, this person's mother, nobody equipped to deal with. And there's no words, right? Yeah. So that's in my heart and mind as I enter into this conversation. And then getting home, getting an email from a high school system saying there's a threat that's been made against your daughter's high school. We've called the police and we're looking into it. And then 2 minutes before you pop onto the Zoom, my daughter calls me saying, can I come home? Because a lot of people aren't in school today. And I just want to come home. And I'm like, of course you can come home.
Yeah.
And so when you're saying this stuff about like, so is this just the world we live in now?
Yeah.
And there's a way in which I think the holiday season, we can kind of pretend and get so caught up in, what you said, like the managing of life and the feelings of what we're supposed to make of the season, what we're supposed to do, particularly what we're supposed to be doing for so many other people, and not tending to the fear, the anxiety, the weight of responsibility some of us may feel towards providing for other people at this time in a variety of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know that connects with the theologian Paul Tillich, or if we want to go straight there.
It completely does.
Right. Yeah, so then you started the conversation before I even let you in on that little contextual window.
Oh,
so you go to where you started the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, My heart is so heavy hearing those things.
Right. I mean, it's right. And I mean, like,
Yeah.
I'm smiling, you hear the different tones of my voice, right? Like I'm
Right,
trying to maintain a level of this is life. And if you and I got really into that space, of course we could both start weeping, right?
and that would be appropriate because
Mhm.
this is exceptionally painful, and it is a part of life, and yet it breaks one's heart.
Mhm.
You know, Tillich describes, so I'm knee deep in Tillich, it's true, and we were laughing
And
about
say a little bit about who Paul Tillich is.
Paul Tillich is known for being an existentialist, a philosopher, theologian. He came out with writing at the same time that another theologian, Karl Barth, came out with writing. They were both survivors of, they were both veterans of World War I. And what ended up happening was, up until that point, the Enlightenment had really formed a lot of the thinking around philosophy and around theology. And this idea about, like, if we can't observe something, or if we can't reason our way into it, then it must not exist, right? But what ended up happening was, during World War I, many of the great Enlightenment thinkers were from Germany, and they were able to manipulate some of their own thoughts and theologies in order to make a case for why what happened was theologically okay. So Barth came out with his own thoughts about what it meant to start from a new place in theology and philosophy. And then Tillich also did, because essentially they had to start from scratch. They had to say, wait a second, this whole reasoning thing isn't working. I have just been through the most traumatic moment ever. I have seen the darkness of humanity.
Can I just pause for 1 second?
Yeah, go ahead.
And that's because we want to believe we are thinking beings who sometimes feel. And the truth is, we are feeling beings who sometimes think.
That's exactly right. And we're all feeling things, right? And the feeling is our source of strength, right? It's not something that we compartmentalize, right? We can do both. And so one of the reasons why I've been drawn to Tillich, he wrote a great book about courage to be. It talks about being and on being. Some of it is a little bit inaccessible, and some of it is spot on. But he talks a lot about anxiety. And as someone who struggles with anxiety, boy, do I struggle with anxiety. I really resonated with this, and how it relates to what you were talking about, and how I'm really connecting with this is, he talks about how we all have these defense mechanisms that work to prevent us from really looking into grief and really feeling it, right? But it's the courage to live, the courage to face into the feelings and to feel the despair and to feel all of what comes with it, like to feel our mortality and to know it's coming, and to do the work. That's the real courage. And I think that that's something I'm really drawn to, and it certainly has shaped a lot of our modern theology around authenticity and the way that we show up in the world. But as someone who also has followed Brene Brown, like I this courage to be vulnerable, and the courage to say, oh man, I am hurting and I am in pain, and I don't want to eat my way through the holiday. I don't
know. I'm kidding.
I mean, no, well, yeah, sure. I like to eat my way, but
that's the way I deal with anxiety.
Later.
As we ordered, I order an entirely prepared Thanksgiving meal from a grocery store here, because I can't deal with and of course we were like, well, what are the extras? And I was like, stuffing, 50 pounds of stuffing.
Hey, listen, but that's another thing that's a whole other topic for us to talk about, is how do we belong to our bodies in this moment too?
That's separate. Let's stay with courage to be, because
that's a whole third podcast.
That's totally, yes. But that title,
yeah,
that's revelatory, that title, because you added on the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to be seen, the courage to be brave, show up, live, all of these things that yes. And that is a key concept, I believe, from working with the Daring Way curriculum for as long as I have. This statement people make about saying, I want to be more vulnerable.
That's
I want
right.
to be vulnerable. And I hear it and I know what that is. And that's not the choice. The choice is to be.
Yeah, exactly.
The
No,
courage
exactly.
to be
Yeah,
exactly how you are
that's
in
right.
a moment, attentive to how you are, what you need, what's appropriate, et cetera, how you will deal with the reality of what is. I mean, in a way, it's very Buddhist.
It is. It is. It's complete mindfulness,
Mhm.
right? In that moment. I absolutely agree. I would also say it's connected in some ways to liberation theology, frankly, because it centers the individual story rather than a normative behavior, right? Which is often rooted in whiteness. So
Wait, say that again. It centers my perspective, my truth, as opposed to saying I have to adjust to whatever the dominant narrative.
right, like a universality. So
Got it.
one of the great, I think one of the great modern theologians of our time, Dr. Patrick Reyes. If y'all are listening, go get his book. It's called No One Cries When We Die. It's a great book.
Wow.
He writes about how he writes about, in terms of discernment, that ultimately God calls us to life, to be, to live. And I see that connection exactly to what we're talking about today. The courage just to live is a tremendous calling that I think that we take for granted.
Okay. So I want to stay a little bit. I'm going to try and make myself, whatever. I need to just trust these things work the way as they should. This courage to be and this connection with the holidays. Can I ask you to say a little bit about like, what are your holiday plans and like, how do you deal with next week and your responsibilities and life management?
So that's a great question. So when I think about the holidays, I am mindful that a lot is placed on the day. And yet my family, practically, we don't really celebrate Christmas ever on the days.
Right.
And that's something that I have had to reconcile, and I reconciled with myself years ago with, is we celebrate on the 26th and the 27th, and I get to wear sweatpants, and that feels really great, right? And so we have a way, because my family, let me, for those that aren't aware, so I'm married to an Episcopal spouse, or Episcopal clergy, and so we have Christmas Eve services, and there's Christmas morning services, and then there's also so both sets of parents now live, well, my mother-in-law and then my parents both live nearby, and so needing to care for them in all of their different ways. So we've come to learn that the best moment of Christmas is the day that it's the nuclear family that is gathered on the 26th, when we're all together, and that is the moment that I look forward to more than anything. In terms of staying sane, I have recognized in myself that busyness does not necessarily equal joy for me.
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
Some people it does, actually. One of my best friends is very much drawn to busyness and enjoys like the enthusiasm of the moment and of the parties, and I love that about her, and that's just not me. So I delight in the quiet moments of when 8 o'clock at night, when I turn off the lights and I could be by myself and stare at the wall and at the Christmas lights.
So is your Thanksgiving similar?
So our Thanksgiving is not. There are no Thanksgiving services. And so we tend to have a pretty open table, and try to invite anyone who doesn't have family around.
And is it something that's a big workload for you, or is it something you do get very excited to host?
I actually have a lot of phobia around hosting.
Mm-hmm.
I really stress out. And so I have admitted it to everyone. Who was it? Glennon Doyle, who wrote a book once, who said that she has a real problem with it too. And I was like, yeah,
Maybe.
I do too. So I just tell everybody, I'm like, I really struggle, but I love you all. So come on over, and it might be kind of bumpy. And let's be bumpy together.
Well, that's great. That's being you.
Yeah.
That's
And I tell people, please don't dress up, because when I eat and you're dressed up, I'm going to be uncomfortable in my own home. That doesn't sound good. Like, let's just wear comfy clothes and we'll have a nice table. And yeah. So for me, I name my fears. I name what it's going to be like. And then people can opt in, right?
it's right. And I'm doing this intentionally, right? To make a sort of, there is a practicality to existential theological thought.
There is.
Like you and
absolutely.
I aren't just attracted to Paul Tillich
Mm-mm.
because it's fun to stay in our heads, although it admittedly probably for you too. I'm not going to assume this, but for me it is actually, I do kind of have fun in my head with intellectual wanderings and exercises and thoughts. And however, there is a real practical lived out, affirmation, right? That even that title of that book, The Courage to Be, and to hear you say the courage to be the person who says, I get stressed out, I have anxiety around hosting.
Yeah.
I want to be hospitable and I want to be with people on this day of giving thanks and connection. And I'm going to make some requests to take care of myself. Cause that, and that's, by the way, a courageous thing to do that I think a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I have learned about hosting is I used to think that it meant that everything was taken care of for everybody. And for me, the only way I can do it is to invite people in to help me with it together.
Yes. And so, by the way, you just named like a truth that should cover a lot broader of a category than just hosting a party. So let's just say that one more time. I used to think my life was to take care of everybody.
Yeah.
I used to think that was my job and to get ahead of problems. And then I realized my life is to connect and invite people into relationship so that we can move through the reality of what is together.
That's absolutely right. It just feels so much better. And because then if, it's going to be a beautiful mess either way, but I'd rather we have a beautiful mess together.
Yeah.
Than to sit here worrying about what people are thinking about my mess, right? Like we can create good stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if in your deep dive into Paul Tillich, which by the way, like that's intellectual, the person I'm deep diving into right now is Marjorie Kemp. Do you know who that is?
No, who's Marjorie Kemp?
Marjorie Kemp was a saint well, she's now a saint. She was of the same time period of Julian of Norwich.
Oh.
So medieval times, kind of like the tail end of the Black Plague, 1300s, 14th century.
Was she one of those abbess?
She was not an anchorite, meaning a person that lived in a little cell.
Yes.
She was known. So two things are significant. Number one, she wrote the first autobiography in the English language. So just like mic drop on that, Marjorie Kemp, badass female.
Badass female.
Wrote the first autobiography, and Julian of Norwich is like a close second.
Sure.
And she was known for this incessant weeping. Which, there's a whole, and look, I am not a medieval scholar. I'm not a huge like scholar of a lot of things that I feel like I'm supposed to know about, but like, hey, I can't read all day long. Right. But there was this whole movement in that time period. The Beguines were a part of it. They were women who they weren't nuns. They had households to take care of, but they practiced a type of piety and spirituality that included an emotional connection, right? Mm-hmm. And Marjorie Kemp, once she discovered Christ or discovered Jesus and would think about the sufferings of Christ, would weep and weep and weep and weep. And this, she kind of got well known for it. She also really pissed people off because of it, like the weeping in church and the weeping around town. and she didn't like it. And I'm also
Well,
like starting her autobiography, and she didn't like it
of
doing it.
course, I get that.
But the thing I'm interested in, given, my interests, is this emotional way in which we come to God.
Mm.
And the Paul Tillich part that connected with me when they posed that sort of dichotomy at seminary of there's either Karl Barth or there's Paul Tillich, like these are the two primary schools of thought that formed us in the 20th century, was that Paul Tillich came from this place of revelation comes from within.
Right.
Anything we want to know or desire to draw closer to God, it comes from our own internal questions.
That's right.
Whereas Karl Barth was like, no, revelation is outside of us. You read the Bible and there's the revelation.
And you might, if you're very lucky, God might choose to give you a revelation at some point. Yeah.
Right.
It's out of your control. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like,
absolutely.
No, the questions, because everything is always to me about the questions.
Absolutely. We're created with such curiosity. How could we not be about the questions, right?
Right.
I'm with you on that.
And Jesus, like, he asks a lot of questions. He's constantly asking people some very pointed questions that get them to think a little bit bigger, deeper, broader about who they are and who other people are, and certainly who he is.
Well, I love that you're reading Marjorie Kemp, because as I'm thinking about this, the courage to be, the courage to show up, the courage to feel your feelings in ways that invite others in. And I think that's gorgeous. And also I'm sure she did have a very complicated relationship with that gifting, but wow, what a way to stare down the patriarchy too. Like to be like,
and that, yes. And then I just happened to grab Mirabai Starr, who's an author, and she writes a lot about mystics, and she has a book called Wild at Heart, which is all about a variety of female saints, mystics from a host of traditions. And she talks about one of the aspects of a more feminine theology has to do not only with emotion for emotion's sake, but because it also allows us to connect with other people and to help shine a light on other strengths of other people. Like, we don't fear emotional connection and lifting up others, through those feelings and being more attuned. And, society just encourages that, right? I mean, it just encourages, I think, that there's some sort of category women are supposed to be in with that.
Yeah. We have to have categories. Otherwise we can't have competition, which means we can't have hierarchy.
Right.
Totally.
But inviting people into that space, to think about how our feelings, I mean, the conversation I had with our shared friend, Mark Robin Collins, not too long ago, that I talked about feelings and faith. Our feelings are so connected, I think, to our faith.
I agree.
And even the feelings when, like, faith is so disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, so we started this conversation talking about grief, right? And these feelings of disorientation. Like, one of the things that I've often struggled with about orthodoxy and the creeds is that I think it divorced us from being able to ask really big questions, because they were so worried about schism, right? And it divorced us from having sometimes these feelings. Like, when I began to ask questions about, the Trinity, well, I might have feelings about God as mother, God as whatever we go off. And so there is a certain way in which I hear what you're saying completely around this. So, Erin, my question for you then is, in your experience about the holidays, what are the ways that you care for yourself? Because I'm in the, spouse, I'm in the background, like trying to make our family work. What about you as someone that's upfront and forward facing?
So I have given so much thought to the holidays over almost the entirety of my life, because, even as kids, they're so monumental in our life as a kid, right? Just even like Christmas morning and presents and school time off and all of that stuff. Also, I think when you're a kid that grows up in a family, I'm ACOA, Dutch child of an alcoholic. When you grow up in a family and all of us grow up in a family with something, There's some stressor there. It may be addiction. It may be something else. You're keenly aware of like, okay, the whole clan's going to be together and you know the pattern. And so yes, holidays are something I've thought about a lot. And then I shared in the podcast I released last week, it was not lost on me pretty early on in my career that one of the side benefits of doing what I do for a living, which is being in front of people as a priest, means I work for the holidays. So, and we do not have a Thanksgiving service now. We used to, and then it was one of those things that, pandemic, it's over. And then do I want to work so hard to bring it back? Because work, I can definitely see as a way in which to also mitigate my own anxiety, keep doing more work, keep being needed by others. So I take care of myself by doing what I said earlier. I do not cook. And that's not because I don't love cooking. I do love cooking. I don't like preparing that large a meal for that many people. Mm-hmm. And so I'd much rather pick up the meal already prepared. This is the first year for Thanksgiving where I'm now in what's my home, which used to be my husband's home.
Oh, wow.
And so, he has his kids and I have my kid, and we will be together. And I do spend time with him. We talk. God love him for being married to somebody that does what I do.
I get it.
Because, I do utilize a lot of these frameworks, particularly around Brene Brown and coming to consensus and talking together. And we do it. And we do talk a lot about Thanksgiving and what'll work and what we'll do. We do try and set aside time for just the two of us. Mm-hmm. And, I'm also very grateful that all our kids are pretty independent people in terms of they can fill their own time, and they're all at those ages. And I don't have a problem with that. Christmas, similarly, we will be taking care of ourselves in that way. I love worshiping at Christmas. Like that can bring me to tears just thinking about it. I no longer have any resentment. And yes, I used to, about the people that show up on Christmas that don't show up all year long. I'm so thrilled they're there. I'm so grateful to connect with a faith story at that holiday and to have to take the time to dig deep into a sermon, to have the gift of getting to preach. It is a stressful night to preach for sure. Christmas Eve is, when we typically preach, and it is stressful, but at the same time, you're part of a big, huge event of Christmas. They're not all sitting there judging and grading your sermon. No. I want them, and I do want them to feel good. I certainly don't believe in manipulating people when I'm preaching, but it's some good news. Like, do not be afraid. It's some good news. And I, want to lift that up. And then, yes, I love the 26th. Thankfully, I have an assistant. So that person will be leading worship on Christmas morning. And it'll be a quiet day, and we will be in sweatpants or jammies all day.
That's so great.
And then I don't connect a lot with family besides this family. We will have phone calls for sure. Some texts will be sent, but it's not the time for me to make the trip home. That's just too much.
I totally hear you. It is enough.
Yeah. And I used to. I used to trip over myself working so hard to live into my responsibility. And then, that thing about inviting people in when you think it's your job to take care of them. One of the miraculous learnings is I don't need to take care of them.
That's right. That's right. I have had many a good spiritual director. One of my spiritual directors gave me this wonderful tool, this wonderful question, which was, because I have always assumed that I just needed to care for everybody, and that the way that I was caring for them was exactly the way that they needed. Right. Yeah. And she was like, have you ever invited them to tell you how they want to be cared for? And I was like, what? And so I started doing that about 3 or 4 years ago, just saying, hey, how can I care for you in this moment? Or is what I'm doing caring for you? Or is this not something that you really care about? It has been life altering.
Mm-hmm.
Because come to find out, I was doing a ton of stuff that nobody cares about. But it was also a great opening for me to be like, oh, actually, I was doing that stuff because I wanted that done to me.
Right.
So
It's right. That's exactly right.
so if you could care for me in this way and show up, I would really love that. Thanks.
Right. And that's, and turning the question around to understand that I can name this and say, this is what I would love.
Yeah.
That's a big, huge part of adulting also, I think, which we talked about last time. And that question, what do you need? That's like your, in my experience, and especially in the more recent past, the primary question in the context of grief.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I walk into that hospital room, what do you need? When I first get the phone call, what do you need?
That's right. When Dorothea comes home today,
Right.
I care for you today.
What do you need?
What do you need? Yeah.
And not making any assumptions about what's needed.
I hear you.
I so often try and encourage people when they say, like, I don't know what to say or what. I said, all you need to say is, what do you need? Or do you need anything from me? Because sometimes they don't.
Yeah. How do I love people the way they actually need to be loved rather than.
Yeah, well, sometimes asking the question is so people are so confused sometimes by the question.
Yeah.
Nobody asks them.
I agree. And then in so doing, you're loving yourself, right? Because then you're showing up. I mean, it goes back to that question of the Thanksgiving and just like inviting people to the Thanksgiving meal, right? Like this is the authentic moment of bringing Tillich to the into our day-to-day life, right? This is the moment where we say, this is who I authentically am. I'm showing up for you vulnerably, ready to help, but maybe you don't need my help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So when you think about courage to be, which I'm going to keep thinking about, maybe that'll be my Advent 1 sermon.
Go for it.
But like, where's that showing up for you in your life?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I do have anxiety, and I have a child who is wrestling with a lot of anxiety right now. It takes a lot sometimes just for us to name that anxiety is happening. Some of you who might be listening might be able to connect with this. Like my thoughts go around in a whirlwind, like when I'm in the midst of a really tough time, and it immobilizes me from being able to live. So when you had talked about, like, people say, I want to be vulnerable. A lot of times I want to be vulnerable, but sometimes I just desperately want to live. Like I don't want to be just stuck in like the fetal position.
Yep.
I want to be able to breathe, and I want to be able to take the next step. Or I don't want to just have to keep overworking because I'm afraid that if I don't keep working, someone's not going to love me, right? I want to be able to stop and breathe and know that I am loved and cared about and safe, right? So that's what Tillich is leading me into throughout that book, Courage to Be. I think for me, I connect significantly with him because as an anxiety sufferer, I think I've seen a lot of the darkness, right? And I I'm absolutely for medicine. Yay, medicine! We take all the meds in our house, rather than come up with lots of ways to distract away from my anxiety. I really want to just live into it and be.
Right. So you're making me think of this idea that I can't remember exactly where I was playing around with it or what prompted it, that it's okay to not be comfortable.
Yeah.
And that so much
that's so good.
Is like, I just have to get rid of this discomfort just for, I have to get rid of it.
Oh, way to go, Erin. We were just talking about this, my husband and I, because here's the issue, because anxiety is on the rise, especially with kids. There is this thing about, like, our kids sometimes will say something like, oh, I don't think I can do this really uncomfortable thing because, for my own self-care. And, I hear that sometimes with my clients. Oh, I can't ask people for money or other things because it's, against my self-care. And I absolutely resonate with this idea of, like, well, actually, maybe maybe living into the hard thing is the thing that we're being asked to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that we can't, that, comfort and convenience are really two things in our world that I think have gotten way too much. And I love convenience, right? I love that I'm picking up my prepared meal. Like,
yeah, that's right. I love my comfy pants. I know. I do. They have their place, right? They have their place. And yet at the same time, like, if we're called to life is not without
what
pain.
is it? What's the saying? Life is brutal, short, and like there's.
Well, Tillich says none of us are getting out of life alive.
Right?
No,
that's exactly right.
None of us are. And that hard reality means that we have some hard truths to live into. That there's going to be sorrow and suffering. One of the things that we haven't named is that there are folks for whom suffering is a day-to-day activity, right? And so
exactly. That's why I think those of us who are privileged to enjoy an incredible amount of comfort and convenience, that's one of the primary reasons it's hard to engage with the stories at the center of our shared narrative that we, want to pretend aren't there.
I agreed.
It challenges my comfort and convenience.
Absolutely. Like what happens when my safety becomes, it's hard. Very hard.
So that awareness, though, also, I think, connects, or it is one of the ways in which grief and gratitude are weirdly intertwined, because this thing, we're not getting out of life alive. I shared this blessing that I know you heard, because it was introduced to me at General Seminary, and I'm quite certain you heard Dean Ewing at some point say it
all the time.
Life is short. We have not much time to gladden the hearts of those who make this journey with us. So be swift to love, make haste to be kind. And whenever I say those words, I get I can feel it in my emotional place in my heart.
Yeah.
And I say them, I utilize that blessing oftentimes when we just said goodbye to a staff member on Sunday after church who was not dying, thanks be to God, moving on. I use that as like the sending forth, as part of that sending forth, and completely was teary, and it was very evident in my voice, and then everybody was very teary. And I turned after we were over, and I turned to somebody, and she was like, "Oh gosh, we just all need a good cry every now and then." And I'm just like, hell yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
Like,
absolutely, we do.
That's one of the feelings I think people long for in faith.
Absolutely. A collective practice, a way in which to share the grief that we've experienced. Yeah. And to give thanks for the space that allows for that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. To be able to say, I'm not okay. Like one of the best sermons I heard, the priest showed up on a Sunday and said, I am not okay. I'm just not okay. There was a political thing that had happened that had really hurt them. And said, I am not okay. This really hurts me. And we all wept together. Like the power in that moment.
I know. It's an incredible, and there's such gratitude in that power, that gratitude of connection, of knowing we're all inexorably connected to one another, that we're part of something, that each one of us matters, that gratitude of seeing somebody fully, letting yourself be seen fully.
Well, and I think, we had talked about, I think in the first podcast, about how having a place, whether it be an AA group or some place where you can go to feel the feelings and express them together, I think is such an important.
Yes, the idea of being in a community where what you're feeling is normalized.
That's right.
Being with people, that's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is because I need to be in relationship with people who take intentionally, sharing stories and talking about things that ultimately matter, knowing that we don't get out of this life alive, and life is short, and I don't have much time to gladden the hearts of those I'm with, and I want my heart gladdened too. Yeah. So how can we not want to talk about things of profound, significance?
Oh, that spoke to me. Yeah, that really spoke to me. I agree. Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking a lot with Advent coming is, there's all of these Advent songs, and there's a song I recently heard about, we shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones that tend the fires. Have you heard this one?
Mm-mm.
It's
Mm-mm.
okay. But I've been thinking about the people that tend the fires, right? Who are the people that are, in indigenous cultures, it was the women. It was always the women who kept the fires going. That was the source of life that allowed people the space to come and to be together and gather and eat. And I was like, yeah, that's who I want to be. I want to be a person who tends a fire, right? Similar to because life is short, but
Right. And the fire's
have,
going to go out.
yeah,
That's exactly right. No, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of significance there.
yeah. I want to be the space where people, in the same way that others have called me to life, to
Sure.
be, the courage to be, I want to be a place where I call others to life. And
Right. And that fire is that spark, that fire.
Yeah.
That's what in the heart of inflamed love, like it makes you run towards stuff that you desire and run towards, building up for the common good. And
yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, agreed.
It's all Holy Spirit-y too, right?
Oh, I hadn't thought about Pentecost.
Yeah.
Fire, but yeah, yep, absolutely right.
This went down like 10 different ways that'll preach.
I give them all to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Reason number 910 to have intentional conversations. They will prompt good sermons. All right.
An article out of that one too. All right, go ahead.
So no, I need to wrap us up, believe it or not. I'm trying to think of what's the question? Because, as opposed to when we walk towards next week and when people are sitting around and dealing with whatever ways their holiday of gratitude is unfolding, what is the question that matters to you?
The question that I'm coming away from this conversation, I don't even think I had it formed before we had talked. So thank you, because this has been a really beautiful conversation. Is what are the ways that I can create a space that call others to life, to be? I think that's it. And now I have to be authentically myself in order to create that space. So how do I create a space that is not reflective of the season, but is reflective of my desire to love?
My question, I think, is more what's getting in the way, because I can so tell, when my brain is going to judgment or criticism or controlling, what is the thing? Because I kind of think most of the time it's either like a real fear or a grief that keeps, what is getting in the way of me being?
For me, the thing that would get away from me doing that would be expectations of others, pre-existing, similar to what I was talking about, like my showing up and saying, hey, this is the way that I thought that I should care for you. So it would be the pre-existing conditions of what the holidays should be.
Yes. All right. Well, we will leave people with these questions as they have their holiday times, with much gratitude for having this conversation with me. And just obviously there'll be the next one. So, and maybe we can, I'll just say it now, explore the different ways feminine theology comes into
let's do it.
The world, even when it's springboarded off of somebody like Tillich.
Doesn't have to be all Barton Tillich. There's definitely wonderful womenist theologians and feminine theologians. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend. I look forward to the next time, and have a great Thanksgiving.
All right. Thank you.